So Mike and I, we build design systems for a living. So of course we get a ton of questions around how can I build my own design system? Where do I go to get started? So welcome to the first part of a multi-part series where we actually go over how you can build your very own design system. Today, starting with our token and variable setup, we're going to look at building out our tokens and variables across our color and type variables and more, across our brand, alias, and mapped collections, and even introduce this idea of a responsive collection as well. We're going to cover some of the different approaches that you can take, how to build your type scales, type variables in a way that makes sense, and some of the theory around building out or setting up your tokens and your variables. At the end of this series, ideally we're going to have a completed design system that you would see right here with all of these awesome components and all their variants and modifiers for you to showcase in your portfolio or integrate into your current company as well. For watching today's video, we will include a link in the description for this, but our design token organization and mapping template, which allows you to easily visualize a lot of your colors and tokens for your designers and your developers, and also our color variables documentation template as well. And again, link for this will be in the description. Without further ado, let's dive right in.
All right, so let's start off by looking at our color variables. Now, one thing I would like to just call out is I will include this template for free to download. Link is in the description. It's just this sample color documentation template where you could add a little bit of description to the color, add in the color scale, a little bit about its usage guidelines and accessibility considerations. Hopefully that'll just speed up your process if you're building some documentation for your design system relating to your color scales. And you can copy and paste that template for each of your different colors. But again, that'll be for free to download. Link will be in the description. We'll touch upon that a little bit later on. So let's start off by looking at how to create colors for your design system. Now, ideally, you probably already have some predefined color scales within your brand, but if you don't, this is a real quick tutorial on how you can create these nice, clean color scales that you see right here for things like your green, which will be used for your success, orange for your warning, so on and so forth. And believe it or not, this is actually a question that I get all the time as to how to create these nice, clean color scales. So I'll show you my approach. And again, there's a ton of tools out there that will actually do this for you, but I don't know if it's relaxing for me or what, because I'm a little bit of a geek when it comes to design systems, but I just love building out my own color scales. So I always like to start off with my main color, whether it's my main red, my main green, my main brand color, in the case of this purple for UI Collective. And what I always do then is I like to set the background to white for one of my duplicate colors here. And then what I do is I actually set another on a black background. So let me send this to back. There we go. So let's copy and paste. So this is our scale here on our left-hand side. What you can do is by adjusting the opacity, you can actually create your color scale. Again, you don't want to have the colors in your color scale have an opacity, but you can use the eyedropper tool to match the color. I'll show you what I mean. So in the case of going down, so getting lighter shades of your main color, you can just simply drop the opacity on this duplicate shade and then use your eyedropper tool to match that color code. So whereas here I have, it's that A259FB color code with a 75% opacity, but now in my color, my actual color scale, I can see that this color is true hex code. Let's do the same with a dark. So because it's on a black background, I can drop the opacity by, let's say, 25 to 75, and now use the eyedropper tool to color match. Let's do one more quick example here. So one more for light, one more for dark. I'm now going to drop the opacity another 25 to 50, and now I'm going to color match, and then the same for our darker shade, and now I'm going to color match. So it's a neat trick, easy trick if you want to exercise a little bit of control over your color scales. And that's the same approach that I took when actually building out all of the color scales that we are going to work with. And I'll also include these in the download as well if you'd like to reference them. So if you are building out your color scales, hopefully that helps. But as I mentioned earlier, if you are watching this video and you're working with a brand, working within an enterprise, you probably already do have those color scales already built out. So next what we're going to do is actually look at a quick definition as to what is the brand collection before we go and build out that brand collection. If you've never built out a design system before, or you're just only used to using a design system, you probably only know of variables in the sense of, a surface action. They're usually defined for a specific role. But not every collection when you're building a design system should have colors and variables that have been assigned a role. There's a certain way that you set up a design system in order to get to your end state. So the first starting point is your brand collection. And I always like to think about your different collections as almost like a tree diagram. And again, this is something that I've gone over in past videos. So I'm going to touch upon it real quick here. So your brand collection outlined in purple, and again, I'll add to this diagram as we continue on in the video. Your brand collection, think about it as the roots of a tree. Your design system cannot grow if your roots don't have that proper foundation. And the same can be said with your design system. As your brand collection is the foundation for everything that's going to come later, for everything that your designers are going to consume, everything that your developers are going to develop, all starts from this brand collection. So it is super important to get this right. Now, as I mentioned before, your variables in your brand collection aren't assigned a specific role. They're really just your variables in its purest form. Things like semi-bold. So it's not even what font it will be semi-bold. It's just semi-bold. It's just a hex code. It's just a number. So as I mentioned, your brand collection is really just your variables and your tokens in this purest form, nothing else. So hopefully that makes some more sense as we actually begin to build out that brand collection. And we're going to start with that right now. All right, so now let's go ahead and build out our brand collection. So let's add a variable, and let's rename our collection to brand. And let's start off by grouping our variables. So when it comes to your brand collection, again, for your colors to start, we will get to type variables, we will get to number variables and all that other fun stuff. But again, we're only going to focus on color for now. So for our color variables, what we're going to do to start is I like to group them. So we have our color, purple, and then 100. Now, I always like to use your 100 scale. I've shown different methods in the past in terms of using t-shirt sizing approach. But just from feedback that I've gotten working with different design system clients, different designers, is that the 100 scale just allows you some flexibility. So what I mean by 100 scale here is this color would be 100, this color would be 200, this color would be 300, so on and so forth. So I'm just going to add a bunch of variables here. And what I'm actually doing to add these super fast is I'm holding Shift and then pressing Return on my Mac. So that allows me to add lots right away. So we have our 300, our 400, our 500, our 600, and then our 700. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's add one more. And let's create this at that to 800. All right. So now what I can do is really just go ahead and copy these in here. So let's say we have this will be our 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so this color here is going to be our 500. This color here will be our 600, our 700, and then our 800. And then let's add all the way down here. So I'm just going to copy and paste in these hex codes. Oops, I duplicated one there. Bear with me. There we go. So we have that one. We have this one. I did that too many times. Sorry, I'm already getting tripped up on myself here. There we go. And then let's simply copy in this last one as well. So what your 100 scale allows you to do is if you do need to add another color in the future, you can simply just go ahead and add one more color, make it a 900. Or if you need to add a shade in between, so maybe I need a shade that's in between the 600 and 700, we can set that to 650. So it's really just setting the foundations for all our colors here. So let's go ahead and do that same approach with our pink as well. So I'm going to go ahead and create a variable that we're going to call pink, and then 100. So 100 all the way down to our 700, and then our 800. So 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, and then 800. And again, I will put all these hex codes for free to download on uicollective.co. Link for this will be in the description if you want to follow along as well. So now I'm just going to go ahead and paste in all of these hex codes. There we go. Just like that. Sorry, I know it's a little bit tedious, but this is way easier than me actually writing in all of the hex codes. Got some feedback in the past that maybe that takes a little bit too long, so we keep things nice and simple. What you can also do is just duplicate it if you don't want to have to write it out every time. So this one will become your red, and then this will be, we'll just paste these in. So we just swap our pinks for our reds. Nice and simple. And again, if it helps, feel free to also pause the video if you want to follow along a little bit slower. Just got some feedback in the past that maybe I was going a little bit too slow. So sorry if I'm speeding things up a little bit, just in the interest of time. So let's then go ahead and focus on our greens. So the exact same thing. We're just going to copy in our hex codes here. And bring these all the way down. Just like that. Nice and easy. So we have our greens. Let's now go with our grays. Gray. Let's do the same thing. And again, with a lot of these colors, as we actually go through this series, I might actually come back and add more colors here or adjust colors, especially once we get into things like dark mode, working with some different components. So this might evolve as we go on and build the design system in this series. So we have our grays. Again, this is actually quite therapeutic if I do say so myself. Let's then go ahead and build out our oranges. And now whether you have your darkest at 100 or your lightest at 100, it doesn't really matter. I always like to have my lightest at 100, but I have seen a lot of designers work it the other way around. So if that's you, you're not doing it wrong. It's just really personal preference more than anything else. And then we're almost done here. So now let's go ahead. We're almost on our last one. So let me duplicate this group. Let's set this to blue. And now a couple more. And then we're almost there. Down the line. And then we'll finally have yellow as the last color that we'll have this for. So let's go ahead and duplicate this, set this to our yellows, and then we'll have all of our colors in their purest hex code form before we actually get into the mapping process. So it was a little bit tedious if you're just getting set up, but I can assure you it will be worth it once you have your full completed design system. So let's go ahead and paste these in. Beautiful. So there we have all of our colors in our brand collection. So super easy. Again, just using our 100 scale to map out all the colors associated with our brand. So before we do get into some of the type variables and number variables for things like radius, is we're actually going to start mapping these down from to our alias and then our mapped collections, just because it's going to introduce you to all of the different collections before we start mixing in some of our type variables, which can really complicate things, especially if you're new to building out your design system. So what we're going to look at next is actually our alias collection. All right, now let's look at our alias collection. Now, your alias collection is not one that's really consumed by your designers, again, because that's your leaf. That's where it branches out into all these different actions, all these different things that your designers can apply or that you'll apply in your components. What your alias collection is used for is to actually almost begin to define those roles. So in the case of your colors, which color is going to be used for success? Which color is going to be used for warning? What's your primary color? What color is going to be used for error? So you're not necessarily defining it at an individual hex code level. You're almost looking at your scales and say, okay, what color is my success color? Is it this color? Is it this color? You know, we're working with one green. So of course, this is going to be our success color. But in your alias, this is where you actually begin to define what those roles for those colors are. So let's go through a real quick example here together. So let's create a collection, and we're going to call this our alias collection. Now, to start, what I like to do is I like to have always start with my primary. So what is my primary color? And again, we're going to use our 100 scale here. So let's go ahead in our primary and let's just copy and paste this 8 times. And again, we can always come back and add some other variables should we choose to. So when it comes to your alias, let's go ahead and rename these. So 200, our 300, our 400, our 500, our 600, our 700, and then our 800. There we go. So now what we're going to do is instead of applying these same hex codes, we're going to create the alias. And again, if you're familiar working with your variables by now, you should know how to do this. But again, I'm going to start with our 100 and then look for our brand color in our purple, because again, our purple is our primary color for UI Collective. And now I'm just going to map our primary 100 to our purple 100, our primary 200 to our purple 200, so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and create that alias all the way down, 300, create the alias, 400, 500, 600. So just two-finger click on one of these, select create alias, and then connect it back. And always be sure not to accidentally connect it back to the alias collection, which is a mistake that I make all too often. Okay, so now we have our primary color set up. And one thing is I do also see a lot of is if we go back to our brand color, is if we have our 500 here, which is our main color, one thing I do see actually a lot of is actually just defining that as default. So you know always what your default color is associated with those individual hex codes. It's not terribly common practice, but it is something working with some design system clients is something that I'm starting to see a little bit more of, but we're going to leave it like that for now, just to spice things up. So now what we're going to do is let's do our secondary color. So for our secondary color, for our UI Collective brand, we actually don't really have one. That's something that we're starting to look at, but we're going to say it's this pink for now, purple and pink. So now what we're going to do is just search pink and then reconnect it. So instead of it being the purple, it will now be the pink. So again, a little bit tedious, but got to do what you got to do sometimes. So pink, 400 are pink, 500 are pink. I really do wish there was an easy way to do this in bulk. And if you have a way, feel free to leave those in the comments below. There we go. And there we have our pink 800. So we have our primary and our secondary. If you did have sort of a tertiary color, you can also add that here. But now let's go ahead and actually start looking at almost like the role base. So what's our error? What's our success? What's our warning? What's our info? So on and so forth. Let's start off with this red. So our red is going to be our error. So same as we did with our pink, is we're going to search for our red. And you'll notice here it's error 100, error 200, error 300. We actually haven't gone into things like our text error, our icon error, our surface error, which that was a little bit of a sneak preview for what we get into in the mapped collection. So for here, we're really just defining what our main roles are. What are those broader categories? So primary, secondary, error, success, so on and so forth. So we have our red 200, we have our red 300, we have our red 400, we have our red 500, we have our red 600, we have our red 700, and we have our red 800. And again, a lot of these colors and color codes might end up changing as we're actually building out our design system. So something always to keep in mind. And our green is going to be our success. So let's go ahead and look for our color green. Search for green, 200. One thing I really do wish is that it picked up on the last variable and just took you right towards that spot. But Figma has not progressed there yet, so that's okay. Green 500, or green 600, our green 700, and then our green 800. All right, now let's go ahead and look at our neutrals. So let me go ahead and duplicate this. So for our, actually what I'm saying, what I noticed here is we didn't actually add in our black or white to our brand collection yet. So that's a little bit of a mistake on my end. So let's go ahead and just create a new variable. Oops, not a new mode, excuse me. We'll get to that a little bit later on. But let's go ahead and create a new variable that we're just going to call black, set this to black, and let's create another one that we're just going to set simply to white. There we go. So before I forget, let's clean that up real quick. So now let's go ahead and look at our neutrals here. So let's go ahead and search for our grays. Grays. If I can spell gray right, there we go. Our gray 200, our gray 300, our gray 400, our gray 500, our gray 600, our gray 700, and then our gray 800. And one thing I do like to do is I don't really put it a part of the color scales because it's kind of like two ends of the spectrum, but I do like to also just map back my black and my white here as well. So if I'm going to search for black, connect it back to the brand, and then white, connect it back to the brand as well, just to keep consistent. But again, I do like to have these in my neutral folder just to keep things nice and organized. But again, you don't always need to. So then let's look at our warning colors, which is going to be our orange. So let's rename these to our warning. Let's go ahead and then map these back to our orange, if I can spell orange right. There we go. Our orange 200, our orange 300, our orange 400, our orange 500, our orange 600, our orange 700, our orange 800, and we can get rid of the black and white from our warnings. Next, let's look at our information colors. Let's go ahead and duplicate this, and let's go our information. And let's go ahead then and do the same for our blues. So we have our blue 100, our blue 200, our blue 300, blue 400, blue 500, 600, 700, and then our blue 800 as well. So there we go. So now I can see that all of the colors are now mapped from our alias into our brand collection. So one thing I would just like to call out is I'm actually not going to bring our yellow into our alias collection. This is a mistake that I often do see a lot of designers making, is they always just need to assume that they need every color in every collection, which you don't always need so. You know, sometimes for more random purposes, big companies, especially banks, they do have a ton of different colors. I have seen working with one client where they had 35 colors, 35 scales of one color or shades of one color, which is way too much. So we're actually just going to leave out the yellow. We're not going to bring our yellow into our alias collection. I just wanted to leave this as an example, as you don't really need a role or a purpose for every single color if you don't see it fits. You know, maybe if you're working at a bank, you're working at a big company, you might use yellows in something like, a graph, but we're not going to worry about our yellows for now. We're going to leave that out of our alias collection. Next, what we're going to do is actually look at our mapped collection. All right, now let's look at our mapped collection. So your mapped collection is what I like to describe as sort of your branches of your tree. This is where it branches out into all these different leaves that everyone likes to see, everyone likes to grab hold of when building out their design. So this is where we actually go from simply just defining what colors are error colors or warning colors to what colors are used in different scenarios for your text, like your text success, your text error, your text action, your body, your headings, so on and so forth. Things like your surface as well. So your surface action, your surface success. So really defining what those individual roles for those individual colors actually are. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at this. So let's go ahead then and let's create another collection that we are going to call our mapped collection. And let's start off with our text. So let's go with our text, and we're going to start off with our headings. So you might like to have your headings in your body as different colors. So I always do like to separate those out. You can even get as specific such as your text, caption, if you have all these different use cases for your text, or maybe you want your caption to be a little bit lighter than your body, which is a little bit lighter than your headings, so on and so forth. I digress. But again, it's really important here to take a close look at the designs that you already have built out. If you are working at an enterprise that does have those designs already crafted, and just take stock of what colors are used for different texts, so on and so forth, so you don't end up, changing colors and all that fun stuff. So let's go ahead and create the alias. And what we're going to do then is we're actually going to then tie these back to our alias collection. So let's search for our neutral, and let's say maybe we want our headings to be that 700, and then we want our body to be that 600. So again, we're not tying these back to our brand collection. We're tying them to our alias collection because our alias connects to our brand. Let's keep going forward then. Let's add a bunch more here. Let's start off with our action, and then our action hover. Actually, let's not get too ahead of ourselves here. We'll take it nice and slow. So for a text action, this might be used for something like a link. And when it comes to my text action, what I always like to do is use that primary color. So usually that primary default. So for your action hover, if I was to hover over that link as an example, I might want it to be a little bit of a darker shade. So I'm going to go with that 600. Next, let's look at our text disabled. So if this text is not clickable, we might want to have this set to our neutral 400. So again, it's a little bit of a lighter shade. And then our body or our headings to let the user know that there is some differentiation there and it is not just your generic body text. And again, you can make that a little bit lighter if you want to as well, but I'm going to leave it at 400 for now. And again, we can always come back and adjust this a little bit later on. So text information. Maybe if there's an information element associated with this text, like a hover over for a tooltip, I like to tie this back to my information default. Same with success. Text success. Let's look for our success default. Let's then go with our warning, and this will be our warning default. Let's also go with our error, and this will be our error default. And then text on action. So what this is really referring to is if you have text that's on a button. And again, we'll get into surface colors in just a sec, but I always like to have that set to my neutral white. And again, with a lot of these variables, if you're wondering what they are, once we actually get into building out the actual components in the design system itself, it might make a little bit more sense. So bear with us here. And again, if you do have any questions, just be sure to let us know. And then for on disabled, so if it's a disabled button, we might like to have that set to that 700. Again, we can always come back and adjust a little bit later on. So there we have all the colors that we're going to use for our text all set up. What we're going to do next is look at our surface colors. All right, now let's go ahead and actually build out our surface color groups. So let's go ahead and set this to surface, and let's start with the surface page. So this would be if you were like, let's say, an agency, and your client likes to have a color of their page a certain color. That's where you would define this. So you have your surface page, which we are going to set that back to our neutral, and we're just going to set it to white for now. We also do like to have surface primary, and this would be used for things like your card components. If you want your card components to have a certain color, you can also define that here. And I also like to have my cards as set as white, and that's what we're going to roll with when we're actually getting into building out some of those components. So we're going to leave that as white for now. Let's then go into a surface. What do you want to do next? Maybe a surface success. And let's go ahead and set that to our success 100. Let's go with a disabled. Let's set that to our disabled, or our neutral, maybe our neutral. What color do we want this to be? Maybe we'll go with our 100 for now. Again, we can always come back and change it a little bit later on. And again, if you're having a difficult time visualizing some of these, it'll help us. We can get into build out our components. But ideally, you already are working with a predefined brand. Maybe you already know what your buttons look like in each case. So it's just a matter of almost just bringing them into your variables and organizing and structuring them nice and neatly. So we have our error. Let's go with a warning. And we are going to set that to our orange 100. Let's also then go with an information. And again, I hope I haven't messed up anywhere along the lines. But again, your design system, you're never going to get it right first try. So if we have to come back and adjust a little bit later on, then we can do so. So for our surface action, one thing I always like to have, your surface action is what color your main action button would be. So in this case, your action would be what I like to have as our primary default. And again, so our on action, so our text on action is sitting on our action button. So our white text would therefore be on our purple surface. So let's go ahead and set this to action hover. And so this would be what color will it be on button hover. So our action hover would be that primary 600. So now let's go ahead and set up our icons. So color, icons. So what colors do we want our icons to be? Our primary. So let's go ahead and define these then. So our primary is going to be a neutral color. So what color is our icons if they're just floating out and about? So that's going to be our defaults. Let's have an information. So if there's an information icon, so for something like a tooltip, oops, what did I just do there? Let's go ahead and, oops, ignore that. Let's go ahead and set that to our information default. Let's then go ahead and build out an icon success. So if there's a check mark or something, maybe we want that to be our success default. A warning, so there's a warning icon. We might want that to be our warning default. And then also our error, maybe we want this to be our error default as well. So next what we're going to do is go ahead and look at our border. So let's go ahead and create another color variable for our border grouping. And again, our border primary. So what is our primary border if there's something like a card? And we're going to set that to maybe our neutral 100 or 200. And again, we can always come back and adjust. For our border, I always do like to also have a secondary, just in case I do want to have a border for a primary color. And again, the reason why I am setting our primary to this gray, but our secondary to this, our primary defaults is you're more likely to be using a gray border for some elements than you are a purple border. And again, that's not to say that it's not the case with your brand. It's just what I'm rolling with for now. And we can always adjust that a little bit later on as we need to. And just to show you that your primary color in some cases can be a secondary color depending on your usage. So that's where you get into some of the more finite elements of documentation associated with your design system and when you should be using some of your different colors. So our information, let's go ahead and set that to our information default, our border information. Again, I might come back and adjust this a little bit later on, just I think it might be a little bit too confusing if you're building out a design system for the first time. And that's the beauty of this, is it's always, it's very iterative. You're never going to get it right first time. So our warning would be that 400. And then we have our error, which is that error default. Oops, maybe we want to go with the default here, not the 400. Let's go with our disabled. And maybe we'll go with our neutral 300. We can also go with our border for our action. So this is where we would get into what color. So if we have that action button, what color do we want the border? And we want it to match usually the surface color. So we have our action, and then our action hover would be that 600. So let's do the same. So our action would be our defaults. So it'd be our primary defaults. And then our action hover would be that 600 value. So to keep it the same. And one thing we will also add here as well, which you'll see when we get into some of our clickable elements like a button, is a focus color. So a focus state, which we're going to set to that default. So there we have all of our different mapped collections or groupings for our colors. I'm going to go ahead and put these all in one group here. So new group with selection that we're going to call, oops, that's not working. Anyways, I'll do that a little bit later on. I'm not too sure what's going on there. But I'm going to group all these in one folder just called colors, just to prep before we get into adding some of our type scales. But hopefully that makes sense as to how we're actually starting off with our brand collection. So our variables in their purest form, we then define them sort of almost what that role is going to be in the alias collection, and then bring those into the mapped collection, which is actually what is consumed by by all of our different designers and when building out some of our components. So next what we're going to do is actually look at our type variables and number variables. All right, so before we get into building out our type variables, one thing I'd like to cover is the different approaches to working with type. Now, this is something that we've iterated on a lot, and I know that Figma only released their type variables in about April or May. So this is still relatively new for a lot of designers, especially those setting up their design system. So I'm going to take you through some of the different approaches and the approach that we're going to take today, because it is a little bit different than what we might have covered in the past. So there's a couple different approaches when you're working with your type variables. So you can still, of course, use the three-tiered architecture. So you have your brand, alias, or mapped. So you might have your font weight and your font family, because again, those are your string variables. And then one long scale. So that would be like 1, 2, 4, 6, all the way through to something like 64. And then in your alias collection, you'd actually begin to break out that long scale into the numbers that you would use for your line height, your text size, and your paragraph spacing. And then in your mapped collection, you would break that out for things like your text body, your text headings, so on and so forth. There's been a lot of feedback that this is a little bit too complex for your type variables, and there are some weird nuances associated with it when it comes to building out your type variables. So if you are still curious about this approach, it's not wrong. It's just a little bit more complex, and we do have a video covering this approach. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check that out. There is also the approach that I have seen a lot of designers doing. Again, it's not wrong. It just violates this three-tiered architecture approach, is actually just skipping alias altogether. So you can, in your brand, you'd actually begin to define a scale for your line height, your text size, your paragraph spacing, and then you just skip alias altogether and then bring that through to your mapped collection. Again, not wrong. Again, just a different approach. But one approach that I have been getting warmed up to, it's an approach that we've taken with a couple of our enterprise design system clients, because again, that is what we do for a living, is build design systems, as you actually skip over the three-tiered architecture altogether. I know this might be a little bit of a new concept, but whether you're just getting started with your design system, what can I say? It's more a concept or approach that I see work regardless of your maturity level when it comes to design systems. It's super easy to use. It's super easy to work with. And I know it's a little bit different than what we've covered in the past, but again, that's design systems. Design systems are fluid in their approach. There is no one size fits all. So what we're going to go over today is an approach that will likely work for you regardless of your maturity level. We're actually going to have all of our font sizes, line heights, paragraph spacing and sizing variables in one collection that we're going to call responsive. And what this will actually allow us to do is easily adjust the sizes, spacings, and so on and so forth, and depending on whether we want desktop, tablet, or mobile. It's a question I get all the time, is how do I adjust my type scales to fit different device sizes? Because again, a heading on desktop might not work on mobile. And so we're going to introduce this concept of a responsive collection. So a little bit different than what we've covered in the past, but it's an approach that I think will work regardless of your maturity level working with design systems or the maturity level of your team when working with or building design systems. So let's take a deep dive into the responsive collection. All right, so let's introduce the idea of the responsive collection. And you might be a little confused as to why we haven't introduced this in the past, but it's a new approach that we've been working with when it comes to your type variables. Again, just after getting feedback from a lot of our design system clients, junior designers who we work with and collaborate with at UI Collective, and also some senior designers as well. It seems to be the approach that works best for everyone in a scalable long term. Again, just because we're introducing the type scales in one collection doesn't mean if you want to go back and map those back up to your brand collection that you won't have the ability to do so. You can always do that later down the line. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. So what we actually like to do when it comes to your type scales, I always like to start with my body, my font size. So I'm going to introduce let's go with a font size and start with our body. Now, when it comes to your body, I always do like to start with a body size of 16. Anything less than 16 is you always do need to be a little bit careful when it comes to your accessibility and make sure that you're not violating your organization's accessibility standards. That's not to say that there aren't font sizes out there that consist of 12 or 14 pixels, but I always like to start with a base of 16. And I'm actually going to set this to my body medium to start. Now, I like to have, always like to have a body small and also a body large as well. Now, there is also a really awesome tool that you can use to actually build out your type scales. So let's go ahead and start off by setting our small to 14 and our large to 20. I'm going to pause the video right here and I'm going to introduce you to the tool called Typescale. Okay, so if you're building out your type scales for the first time, we like to use this cool tool called Typescale. Again, we're not going to go through this super in depth when we're using this tool, but we do have another video on that. I will leave a link in the description. But Typescale is a totally independent tool of UI Collective. We do have an offer for approved community members where you do get 2 years for the price of one. It's only about $6 a month. Great deal. But again, we're not making any affiliate money, no money at all off Typescale. It's totally independent from UI Collective. So what the tool allows you to do is set your body size. So as I can see here, and as I just mentioned, I always like to start with 16 for our body medium, or the body size that we're going to select most frequently. But again, if you decide to start with 14, and you can see that the scale will adjust. So let's set that back to 16, and you have all these different scales to choose from. Which scale is right? It really depends on your brand and how you want to, how large or how small you want your font. I always do like to start with major third, but there's all these different scales to choose from depending on how large or small you want your text. So as I mentioned, I like to start with major third. Now again, when you're building your type scales, I always like to start with 16 pixels. And if you'll notice here, so it's telling me that our paragraph 16, our H6 is 20, our H5 is 25, and then our H4 is 31.25. And the reason being is there's some math behind that logic there. It's trying to produce the most accurate scale possible. But that's not always the case with Figmas. You can't always do that. It's a little bit clunky. It's a little bit weird to work with. So I always like to follow a specific grid. So I can see that my paragraph starts at 16 and my H6 is 20. So that's a 4-pixel grid. And I always like to work with a 4-pixel grid when it comes to my type scales. Then what I'm going to do, I can see that my H5 is up 5 to 25, and the closest multiple of 4 to 25 is 24. So my H5 would then be 24. My H4 is 31.25. Closest multiple of 4 to that would be 32. So my H4 would be 32. Now, that's what I like to do when building out my design systems, is follow that 4-pixel grid to avoid some of these decimal points as well. So again, this is a real neat tool if you're building out type scales for the first time. Highly encourage you to check it out. But now what we're going to do is flip back to Figma, where we start to build out our type scales. All right, so now let's go ahead and actually build out our type scale. Originally, I wasn't going to use this tool to build out our type scale, just in the interest of time, but I felt that it might be easier if we just go through it together. If you haven't watched our building a type scale video, or how to set up your type scales, we do have a couple of videos on that. And again, if you are curious, I will leave some links for those in the description. So I'm going to be flipping in between them here. So bear with me if that's a little clunky. So right away, you know that I set my body size here to medium. And then if we look back at our type scale, again, we have that small font, which might be used for something like a caption. So what I did is I just simply adjusted that small to 12. You can also add a value in between where this small might be 14, and then you might have a caption size for that 12. But for now, what we're going to do is we're just going to keep it as it is, just in terms of simplicity. We can always add another style or another text size a little bit later on. So again, we have that 12 following that 4-pixel grid. We have that 16, and then I can see that our H6 is 20. Now, personally, I actually always like to have a paragraph size that is set to 20 pixels. Again, your heading might be a little bit thicker. It might be a different font than your paragraph sizing. So that's why I still do have, a body large set to 20, even though type scale is not giving me that paragraph of 20. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, if you have any questions on that, just feel free to leave some questions below. So let's go ahead, still with our font size. Let's go heading, and then starting with our H5, I believe. What was the lowest one that we had? So then we have our H5. So let's go with an H6, actually. So we still do have a heading. That's 20. So start with an H6. Again, we can rearrange this a little bit later. And we're going to set that to 20. Our H5, following that 4-pixel grid, was set to 24. Then let's go ahead, and so I can see that this is 32, and then this would be 40. So our H4, following that 4-pixel grid, round this up to 32, round H3 to 40, so 32 and then 40. H3, 32, H4, 32, sorry. H4, 32, and then our H3 would be 40. And then let's go with our H2, our H1. Let's check what those would be. Our H1. So our H2 in this case would be 48, and then 52, 56, and then our H1 would be 60. So 48 and then 60. So H2, 48, and then our H1 would be 60. So that's how we can use the tool typescale to actually build out our typescale to keep things nice and consistent. And next what we're going to do is actually look at how we can use typescale to calculate our line height. Okay, so now let's look at building out our line height. Now, when it comes to line height, you can still use type scale. Essentially, what that allows you to do, the tool allows you to do, is set what you want your line height ratio or multiple to be. A ratio is the wrong word, but more multiple for both your body and your line height. And again, what that specific value should be, it's up to you and your brand. I've used values in the past where people say that's wrong. I've used values where people say this works perfectly. It's really up to you. What you can do is just set this to 1.2. And when I do that, I can see that type scale, the tool adjusts a little bit. As you can see, it's just set to 1. When I set it to 1.2, you can see how what that spacing looks like. So let's look at just one example here. And then, so I can see that my body is set to 16 here. So paragraph size set to 16. What I'm going to do is then multiply the paragraph size by that multiple. So 16 times 1.6, 16 times 1.6 equals 25.6. Still following that 4-pixel grid. I can see, so 16, 20, 24. 24 is the closest to 25.6. So I'm going to go ahead and set that first line height to 24. Now, this is what that would look like here. And again, it's always great when you're building out your type scales to just add some text to a canvas to see how it looks. So I can see that we have our body size of 16. We have our line height of 24. I can see what that looks like. And personally, I really like that. So let's go ahead then and build out those variables. So starting with our line height, let's go with our body. And let's go with our body medium equals, and that is going to be equal to, 24. So now let's take the values and then multiply it again by, what was that ratio? It was 1.6. So I actually have my calculator out, so we're doing some math in real time here. So let's go ahead and start with our, we don't want this in font size. We want line height separate. There we go. Sorry about that. Thanks for calling me out, everyone behind behind your computers. I can see you saying, stop, Kirk, you're in the wrong group. So thanks for that. So let's go ahead and then take our font size for small, 12 times 1.6, 12 times 1.6 to my handy dandy iPhone, set that to 20. So I can see that our line height for body small would be 20. And then let's do that for our large. So let's go with our, what was our size for our, 20. 20 times 1.6 equals 32. And that's a multiple of 4 right away. So I can see that works just fine. So what we can go ahead and do then, my Figma decided to go offline. All right, and now we're back. Is let's do the same with our heading as well. So let's go in here and let's create a new variable called heading, and then we'll start with our H1. And how many, if I go back here, how many did we have? We had 6 H tags, and I'm actually just going to go ahead and rearrange these real quick. H3, H4, H5, H6. There we go. Let's rock and roll. Okay, so we have our H1, we have our H2, our H3, our H4, H5, and our H6. So let's do the same. H2, H3, H4, H5, then we got our H6. Beautiful, just like I wanted to see. So again, let's go back to type scale. Let me move down all the way down here and open that back up. So with your headings, again, there isn't really no specific value that works best as a multiple. We're going to set it to 1.2. Again, it can be 1.4, 1.6, it can be 0.8. It can be really anything that works with your brand. So feel free to play around with that. So let's go ahead then and multiply everything by 1.2. Let's go 60 times 1.2. That is going to equal to 72. So our line height for heading is going to equal to 72. And let's actually just test this out real quick. If our set this to 60, and we'll apply our variables a little bit later on. So bear with me here, and then set our line height to 72. There might be a little bit too much space there, but again, it's something you can play around with and adjust it to the design that you see fit. So again, we'll leave that as is for now, just for the ease of simplicity. So that's 60. So then let's go 48. 48 times 1.2. That'll be 57.6. Following that 4-pixel ratio, that should be 56. I mean, if I got any of this math wrong, I'm doing it on the fly here, so bear with me. Feel free to leave it in the comments. 40 times 1.2. And again, as we build out our design system, I might realize I got something wrong. We can always come back and adjust a little bit later on. So 48, let's go with our 32. What did I do here? So that's our H3. I did that right? 40 times 1.2. Oops. 40 times 1.2 equals 48. I think that works. Let's then go with our H4. So our 32 times 1.2 equals 38. So let's round this up to 40. Again, still following that 4 pixels. Our H5, 24 times 1.2 equals 28. So this will become 28. And then our H6 of 20 times 1.2 equals 24. And then this will become 24. So then there we have all our different line heights. If we want to test it out on our smaller one as well, let's set this to maybe 20, and then let's set our this to 24, which I can see. And then that is an example of what our H6 might look like. And if we use our paragraph sizing, then again, for your, where is our paragraph? For our large, maybe this is 32 because you want it to be a little bit more readable. Again, there's a ton of different things here. There really is no right or wrong answer, as long as you just be careful around accessibility. But this is what we're going to roll with for now when we're building out our design systems. And again, we can always come back and adjust a little bit later on. All right, so now let's go ahead and look at our paragraph spacing. And when it comes to your paragraph spacing, there's not as much math behind it. It's really personal preference as to what you want that to be. So we're just going to start off with some basic numbers for now. Again, still attempting to follow that 4-pixel grid as closely as we can. So what we're going to do, let's go in our all variables. Let's create a new variable, and let's call this paragraph spacing. And starting with our body and starting with our medium. And we are going to go ahead and set this to 16. Let's then add a small, and then for our 12, we'll also just leave that at 16 for now. But what we can do then for our large, where it says 20, is then maybe we can increase that large to 20. There we go. Perfect. So there we have our sample paragraph spacing, and then let's create another group here for our headings. Let's go with our headings, or headers, heading. Let's go with heading. Sorry, keep it consistent on the left-hand side, starting with our H1. And let's start off by setting that to 48. Let's then go with an H2. Let's set that to 40. Let's then go with an H3. Let's set that to 36. Let's go with an H4. Let's set that to 32. Let's then go with an H5. And then let's set that to our 28. 28, again, still following that pixel grid. And how many H tags do we have? We had 6. So let's add one more, H6. And then let's set that to 24. Oops, not 23, 24. There we go. So there we have all the variables for our line heights, our font size, and our paragraph spacing as well that we are going to be using. Next, what we're going to do is actually go back into our brand collection and look at things like our font weight, our font style, and then also our spacing variables as well, which we'll add back into this responsive collection. Okay, so now that we have a responsive collection in a decent spot for now, again, we're still going to add on to this a little bit later on. Let's go back to our brand collection, and still on the topic of our type, let's look at our font family and weight. So this is a little bit a part of the new approach that we're going over. So no longer the 3-tiered architecture. Again, if you still want to do the three-tiered architecture, that's totally fine. It's still right. But this is a little bit more of a simplified approach, given the fact that you're going to be adjusting your font weights and your font families, probably only when you just create them. It's not something you're going to be going back and adjusting time after time or tweaking, as are maybe your color variables or your number of variables, where there can cause some confusion, especially when you're looking to apply those variables to components. So back in your brand collection here, what we're going to go ahead and do is let's create some string variables for our type. So starting off with our font weight. So our font weights are defined as everything, like things like our bold, our semi-bold, our regular, our light. So let's go ahead and start off with our regular, and we are going to set that string value to regular. And if you're new to this, I'll show you why we're doing this and how this works when we actually go ahead and build out or apply these variables to a text style. Let's also go with a semi-bold, semi-bold, and we're going to set this to semi-bold. Let's then go with a bold, and then we're going to set this to a bold. Then that's it. That's really that simple. If you want to get into light, you want to get into medium, you can go ahead and do that as well. This is just what we're going to be rocking with today. Again, we're building a design system, not the most beautiful design system in this series. So that's what we're going to be working with. And again, if we need to add something a little bit later on, we can go ahead and do so. So still in type, let's create another string variable for our font family. And for our font family to start, what I like to do is have a primary font and a secondary font. You can break it out between your body font and your headings font. Caption font, I always like to go primary, secondary. I don't know why, I just do. So we're going to have a primary and secondary, and our primary is going to be set to inter, and our secondary is going to be set to pop-ins. So that's simple when it comes to adding your font family and font weight. And again, as part of this approach, this new simplified approach that we're taking, and when it comes to working with some of our enterprise design system clients, this is an approach that seems to be working really well, is not actually bringing these through your Alias collection, your mapped collection. Again, just we've got some feedback from designers, particularly more junior designers, that can be a little bit confusing sometimes. So we're going to leave these in the brand collection and then to simply apply them to the style from the brand collection. And we'll go over that next. Okay, so now what we're going to go ahead and do is actually build out our type scales together here. Now, one thing I would just like to call out is I do have a little notepad here on another screen, so that I might be flipping back and forth between them. So bear with me if that is the case. And one thing I would just like to call out is I did just make a quick change for your font family. Again, just to keep things a little bit more clear around what is the value for our body versus our heading. So instead of primary, secondary, we have our body, and then we have our heading. So let's go ahead and go into a responsive collection here. And let's start off building out, so let me add some sample text. Lorem ipsum is the standard. Probably going to copy and paste this in. Dummy text of the type industry. There we go. Think that works. So let me left align that. See how this works. And then let's go ahead and apply our elements here. So let's apply that variable. So let's start off with our body size of small, and then let's go ahead with our line height of 20, and then let's go with our paragraph spacing for that small, paragraph spacing for our body, and that's going to be set to 16. And then if I was to copy and paste, enter, I can see that that is what that size would look like. So pretty good, if I do say so myself. So what we can do then is let's actually go ahead and create a style of this. So let's go into our text here, and let's create a style. Oops, let's move this out of the way, and let's call this our body small. There we go. Let's create that style. And then one thing we still want to go ahead and do is adjust this to add in our inter property. So if I go down, if I apply the variable, let's apply our inter for our body. And then for our font weight, let's just keep it to regular. So where is it? The add apply variable. Let's set that to our regular. There we go. So now it's nice and clear as to what's what when we're using our body small. Let's then go ahead and look at, open up our variables here again. Let's go ahead then and look at our body medium. So same thing. So we have our body small. Let's get a little too tight here, but I promise you it'll work at the end of the day. Let's go ahead, detach this, and then let's go ahead and apply what's our size for our body, 16. Apply the variable size, font size body, set that to 16, and then our line height for our body is going to be equal to that 24 value. So line height body, and that's going to be equal to 24. And then our paragraph spacing for our body, move this up. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. There we go. And then our line height for our body, our paragraph spacing is still that 16. So there we go. Let's then go ahead and look at our large. So our large for our font size is going to be 20. Let's go ahead and apply that variable. And this is going to be our body size 20. Our line height for our body is going to be 32. So let's reconnect this to 32. And then let's set our paragraph spacing for our body, and this is going to be equal to 20. So paragraph spacing 20. So a little bit of a jump. There we go. So there we have our different body sizes. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video here real quick, and then we're going to focus on our headings. All right, so now let's focus on our headings. And if you just watched and you paid close attention, you'll recognize that I didn't add my style in. So let's go ahead and let's add these in together here. So let's focus. So we have our body medium, our body medium, our body medium. There we go. Let's create that style. And then we have, all right, let's check our style. That's in there. And then we have our body large. And then we also have our body large. Now, things that we can also do here is we can also add individual styles for links and for semi-bolds. So, you know what? Actually, before we get into our headings, maybe why don't we do that as well, just so we can get a quick visual as to what that's like. So we're going to add semi-bolds and links for each of our different elements here. So let's go ahead then and simply copy and paste. So if we have our basics, so just our basic bodies, let's add our basics each. So let's go ahead then and detach each of these styles. And they're going to be really the same. One thing we're just going to do is just add an underline. Add an underline, and then we're actually just going to go ahead and add that underline as well. And you can add an underline just by going into here and also doing that. But anyways, I digress. So now let's go ahead and save these. So this is going to be our small, let's go, what we'll call link, small link. Let's go with our medium link. Oops, let me change this. Again, making mistakes as I go. It's the design system way. Oops, let me not do that. Let's go ahead and edit this. So we have our body small link. There we go. And we can move that up, group that together. Let's go with our medium. Create style. We have our body medium link. Oops, spelled that wrong. Medium link. And then let's go ahead and let's add another one. So let's add another text style for our, that's not right. Bear with me here. So let's change this. So this is not our medium link. This will just be our link. Let's change this to medium dash link. There we go. And then let's add this as our body large dash link. There we go. So now we have our styles for a small link, medium link, large link. And then let's do one more for our semi-bold here. So let's go ahead and detach all these. Apologies if you hear some sirens going on in the background. So then let's go ahead and add our semi-bold to each of these. Change the font weight. Oops. Let's change the font weight to just that semi-bold. Change the font weight to just that semi-bold. Let's go ahead and create the style here. So then this will be our body small semi-bold. This is going to be our body medium semi-bold. This is going to be our body medium semi-bold. And this is going to be our body large semi-bold. Let's go ahead and rearrange these now. So our small link, small semi-bold, medium semi-bold, or medium link, and then large link, large semi-bold. Okay, so there we have all the different variations here that we might need for our body. And again, what we can do is we do need to add another element, another size between our small and our medium, like a 14. We can go ahead and do that a little bit later on, should we need to, and we're actually building out our components. Okay, so now that we have that, now let's go ahead and actually build out our headings. Okay, so now let's go ahead and build out our headings. So let's go ahead and just copy one of these, and then let's just simply adjust. So let's set our font family to that heading. Let's set our font weight to semi-bold, bold, or maybe bolds. We'll keep it with semi-bold for now. And then let's go into, let's see what we got here and start to apply our variables. So our font size for our headings, that's 60. Our line height for our headings, there we go, 72, much better. Paragraph spacing for our headings, 48. Extend that outwards. There we go. Let's go ahead and save this as a style. So let's go with a heading H1. There we go. Let's copy paste, disconnect, and then go with our H2s for all of these. H2, we have our H2. Let's go ahead and save. Then let's go with our heading, heading H2. Make sure that's saved right. Yep, heading H2. Let's go ahead with our H3. So let's set that to H3, our H3, and then our H3. Let's go ahead and save. Heading H3. Oops, that's not heading H3. That should be H3. There we go. Let's go ahead, copy and paste this down. collapse this in a little bit. This will be our H4. Let's go change this. Oops, did detach. Set this to our H4, our H4, our H4. Let's go ahead and save heading H4. Detach. Let's go with our H5, our H5, then our H5. I can see it's getting much smaller now, which will be great when we get into things like our cards. So heading H5, and then let's go ahead and do one more. So disconnect this. Let's set this to our H6, H6, our H6, and let's go ahead and save this as our heading H6. There we go. And there we have all the different values for our heading. One thing I would just like to call out is, oops, doesn't look like I saved that style. So let's go ahead and, or maybe I did and I accidentally disconnected it, which I did. Perfect. So you probably realize that this is set to 20 and then this is also set to 20. If you do have a heading that is the same size as your largest paragraph text, that's totally fine. Usually just make sure there is a difference between the two. In this case, our text is a little bit different, and then our line height and paragraph spacing is also a little bit different between them. So just something to keep in mind. And then there we have all of our different, one, two, let me double check here. I didn't miss anything. Okay, we do stop at H6. Perfect. So there we have all the styles that we'll use when building out our design systems. And again, apologies if I made a mistake anywhere in there. As we go and start building out some of those components, I might come back and tweak things or just make some or fix some of those mistakes as we go along. So we're not done quite yet, though. One thing we do need to still do is look at our border width, spacing variables, and also our radius variables as well. Okay, so we're not done quite yet, as we still need to add variables for things like our spacing, our border radius, our border width, and all that fun stuff. So what we're actually going to do here in our brand collection is we're just going to create one master scale. So scale, and then set this to 100. Now, what you can do here with your 100 is you can set this to 4, or you can set this to 8. I'm going to set this to 4 to start, because I like to follow that 4-pixel grid. But again, you can do 8 as well. Now, I'm going to add a couple here. So maybe set that 200 to 8 and that 300 to 12. And the beauty of using 100 scales is, if you're building a button, you don't want that button border width to be super thick. You might only want it to be 1 pixel. What you can do then is add a 25 value and set that to 1. If you want it to be 2 pixels, you can add a 50 value and set that to 2. Because 100 divided by 2 is equal to 50, gives you that value. So, or something like that. Anyways, I digress. But essentially allows you to add numbers in between your scales if you need to violate that 4-pixel scale. So if you need a 6, that can be 150. So 6, because that's halfway between 8 and 4. Quick maths. All right, so let's go ahead and add a bunch now. So we got our 400, our 500. And again, this is something that we'll probably add to as we start to build out some of our components in the next episode of this series. So stay tuned for that. It'll probably come out in a couple weeks where we'll probably look at form components. 1100, let's go 1200. So following the same logic, so this will be 16, this would be 20, this would be 24, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, yep, 28, 32, 32, 36, let's go 40, 44, 44, and then 48. And hopefully you get the picture by now. And one thing I would just like to call out is if you know you need a 64, it's totally okay to skip ahead to 1600 or whatever that would be to add in that 64. You don't always need to have every single value in here. But as long as you're following that 100 scale, that tends to work just fine. So next, what we're going to do is actually look at our alias collection. So we're going to go back into our alias and look at our border width and our border radius. Okay, so now what we're going to do is go ahead and actually look at taking the scale here and bringing these into our alias collection, breaking them out into border width and border radius. Now, in past videos, what we have done is showed you how you can take that same 3-tiered architecture approach that we did with our colors. So where you have your brand, you have your alias, alias, and then you have your mapped collection here, brand, alias, and mapped collection. where you would start off, again, with the scale. So almost very similar to what we showed right here a little bit earlier on in the video, where you have one long scale, then you might break those out into like border width or line height, and take those into the mapped collection for border width and line height. But again, when we were chatting with clients and we were chatting with different designers of various seniority levels, a big piece of feedback we always got was, there's really no purpose in bringing those into the mapped collection because they don't evolve from the Alias collection, which is a really fair point. If you want to be consistent across that 3-tiered architecture approach, you're really just doing the exact same thing in your Alias that you will be in your mapped collection when it comes to your border width and your border radius. Again, you don't want component-specific tokens for these, or variables for these. You want them to be more generic. And I'll show you what I mean. So for the purposes of this, again, I show you some different approaches to doing so. And again, the approach is also still right as well, is showing how you can really just stop at your Alias collection when it comes to your brand, or because your mapped would really be the same as your Alias. You just be connecting your mapped to your Alias with no real difference between them. So let's go ahead in our Alias collection here. And if that doesn't make sense, hopefully I'll clear that up. So let's start off with a border width, and let's start off with our none. So maybe we don't want a border on this element here. So back into our brand collection, one thing I did add is just the 0 value, so 0 and 0. And then let's go back into our Alias collection. Let's have a small, let's have a medium, and then let's have a large. You can also use a 100 scale here as well, but I don't anticipate adding anything beyond a 4 pixel, which will be our large. Sneak preview there for our border width. So then let's go ahead and tie this back to our scale. So our scale will be 0, and then our small will be that 25 value, and that 25 value would be equal to 1. The one thing that does drive me a little bit crazy here is I can't see what that value is referring to. So sometimes what I do see is I put 20, as I see 25 and then 1. So the user would know what it is that value is really referring to. So 25, 1. That's a nice trick to have. So we want this one to be our medium, because again, following that 4 pixel, that just from practice, I know that we're following our 100 scale. So which would 4, half of that would be 2, which would be that 50 value. And then our large might be that 4, so which would be that clean 100. So there we have our border width. Now, if I was to translate these down to our mapped collection, these would be exactly the same. And something I always hear all the time is, what if I want to add a component, something that's more component specific? Well, sure, you can do that, but you want to avoid component specific tokens at all costs. Having to manage component specific tokens, and we do have like a video that covers that. I believe it's 3 mistakes not to make with variables or something like that. It's in our Figma variables playlist. It covers that a little bit more in depth. But again, from speaking with clients, speaking with designers, they often just choose to stop at the Alias. It's not a wrong approach. It's just the approach that I'm seeing more and more designers choose to take as they get more comfortable with their variables and as they get more comfortable building out design systems. So that's why we're just stopping here. So you'll see later on when we start building out our components, we're only going to be applying the border width and the border radius from the Alias level, but not any of the colors from our Alias level. So it might be a little confusing now, but trust me, once we start building out components, it is going to make more sense. And if you still do decide to go with a 3-tier architecture approach, as we have covered in the past in a lot of our videos, that is also still fine. All of these approaches work just fine. It's just what we are seeing works most with more designers, which is what we're covering right now. And again, later, once we start building out our design system, we might add in some mapped layers. We might evolve this as we go about. Okay, so let's go ahead and then create another group here for our border. Oops, not that. Let's go ahead, all variables. Let's create another number variable for our border width. Oops, border width. And let's go start off with a none as well. Oh, sorry, border radius, excuse me. There we go. Come on, let me get rid of that. Delete. There we go. So our border radius, we're going to start off with our none. It is going to pull from that same value. So let's go with our scale. This is going to pull from the 0. And then we're going to add a couple here. So we're going to add a small, we're going to add a medium, and we're going to add also a large as well. You can also add a round if you want your It can really just be like round, where it pulls from a much larger number of your scale to create that nice pill-shaped button. If you do want to have some more round elements, we're going to leave that out for now. So in this case, our small is going to be that 2, so that 50 value. Our medium is going to be that 4, and then maybe our large will be that, maybe we want to go with that 8. So, our medium should be that 100, and then our large would be that 8. Just make sure I did that right. Large would be that 8, absolutely. So there we have our border width and our border radius. And again, if you were to bring these down to your mapped collection, they would be exactly the same. So again, we are just leaving it at the alias level for now, which might be a little bit of a different approach from what we've shown in videos in the past. But again, both approaches are just fine. Next, what we're going to do is look at our spacing variables before we get into where you would add different modes, such as light, dark, maybe add a different brand as well. Okay, so now let's go ahead and build out our spacing variables. And this might make a little bit more sense as to why we call this collection responsive, because it's going to contain all the elements that are going to adjust based on our type of mode. Anyways, we'll get to that a little bit later on. So it's not specific to your type anymore. We're adding something that we're just going to call spacing. So spacing, and one thing we can do is maybe for this time we'll use our t-shirt sizing approach just to get you a little bit more comfortable. So we're going to start off with a 3 extra small, and then let's go ahead and just multiply this a bunch of times. So I have a 2 extra small, so 2 extra small, just an extra small, a small, a medium, a large, an XL, a 2XL, and then a 3XL, and then a 3XL. I think that works just fine. So one thing I actually did go back and do is I just added in real quick a 64 in our scale here. So for our responsive, one thing that we're doing is, so for our spacing, this is things like your padding, and this is things like your gap. How will those elements adjust based on the different sizes? So for 3 extra small, one thing we're going to do is go ahead and tie that back to 2, so that 50. Then we going to want this one to be our 4. And again, this is just from practice, what I'm doing here, just what I'm used to working with. That's why I'm just able to do it so quickly. So if you need to slow down and do this again, feel free to pause the video just so you get more comfortable with this. So we want our extra small, we're going to want that equal to 8. And plus 2, with a lot of the values that I'm setting here, it's just from my experience of building components with buttons, just knowing what values I'm going to want for my padding and gap a little bit later on. I'm never really going to use a padding or gap of 1. I'm never really going to use a padding or gap of, 30. I'll usually go 32, or I'll 28 or 24. Anyways, I'm just rambling right now. So then we want this one, so that's our 8. We want our small to be that 12. This will be 300, and let me just go back into our brand here, and let's just confirm that 300 is indeed 12. Absolutely. Back into our spacing. Our medium, we're going to want to 16, so scale, let's set that to 400. Scale for our large, maybe we might want to set this to our 24. So again, with a t-shirt sizing, it's a little bit different than your 100 scale, and that they doesn't need to follow it exactly. So in a medium, I'm going from that 400, which would be that 16, but maybe for my large, I'm jumping right to a 24, which in this case would be our 600. 600, let's just go back and confirm. 600, yep, 24. And again, if you have any questions on this, I know this can be confusing if you're doing this for the first time, and that's why we're here, so feel free to leave some questions below. And then scale, let's set this one to our 800, and then our scale, let's set this to our 48. Whatever our 48 is, let's go back and look. So our brand is our 1200 is our 48, and then our 1600, so 1200 and 1600, 1200 and 1600. So brand, scale 1200, and then scale 1600. There we go. So then there we have our spacing variables that will be used for padding and gap. And again, there's a lot of different approaches that you can take when working with your spacing variables. We've covered some of those before in the past, but for now, we're just going to be using t-shirt sizing. Again, you can use 100 scale if you'd like to, but anyways, we might, as we start building out our design system, this might evolve a little bit as we go, but we're going to leave it like this for now. Okay, next what we're going to do is actually look at our modes. So if we do need to add some different modes, where might those go? Now for our design system, we're going to get to dark mode eventually, but we're not going to be adding different brands just yet. We might get to that in a later part of the series, but I still get lots of questions around if I need to add another brand, where does that go? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover that real quick as to where those modes would go. So now let's go ahead and just look at how we can utilize this responsive collection. So your responsive collection works best when you have desktop, tablets, and then also mobile as well, wherever that other mode I added is. There it is. Okay, so what your responsive collection allows you to do is all those that are a little bit responsive, again, maybe even radius can go in here as well if you'd like it to go in here. But anything that's responsive, so all these numbers, how our line height, text size, spacing for a lot of our elements adjusts between those different modes, this is where that can go into. Now, I'm not going to cover it too in depth, so we're going to delete tablet for now. We're going to go through a really, really quick example. So what I've actually done here, so let's set this, just call this button, and maybe just to see the size, let's go ahead and just set that to red, or let's try to find a purple. Again, I'm not going to apply my variables right now. We'll get to that a little bit later. And then let's go ahead and just simply, what we're going to do, let's add a quick frame here. So we're going to add a quick frame, and then maybe let's just separate this in the background. There we go. So let's go back into our local variables. And one thing I did with this button, sorry, now I wish I had a bigger screen, is I added the 24 spacing here horizontally. So what that would be, where is that? So we got our brand, our scale. So I can see that that's our 600. So we need to go and look at our 600, our spacing, our 600. There we go. So I can see that's our large. Now, maybe on our mobile, what we want that to reduce to is we want that to reduce to half. Again, that's just an example. So half of 600 is that 300, which should be that 12. So then on the mobile frame, I'm defining it. So if I drag it to mobile, all of a sudden the spacing in our button gets reduced to 12. So now if this is our desktop frame, this is our mobile frame, there we go. And I go ahead and apply that mobile. See how it's now applying the different spacing variable. So it's reducing those elements accordingly based on your desktop, mobile, or tablet. So when it comes to some of your responsive elements, that's the beauty of this responsive collection. It's a little bit of a new approach, as I mentioned earlier on in the video, that we have taken in the past, but it's one that we're seeing used more and more and is super, super effective. Next, we're going to do is look at if you need to add different brands. Okay, so now let's look at if you need to add some different brands. Again, we might add a different brand later on in this series, depending on how things go. But what we're going to do is just sort of touch upon that at a high level, just because I do get so many questions on that. Now, if you want to add another brand, this is where it depends how different of a brand. If we go back into our brand collection, and let's say this is pretend this right here is the Coke brand. So pretend you have all your colors associated with Coke. Now, do you want to add a Diet Coke brand, or do you want to add a Sprite brand, which is also affiliated with Coke, but has a totally, totally different color scheme? Now, this is where it can get a little bit tricky. So if you're just adding, so pretend as if you're Diet Coke, and you're building out a Coke design system, and you just built out your first brand here, which is Coke, and you want to add Diet Coke, you can do that at the alias level, because your brand colors are all going to be the same. You know, your Diet Cokes, your Coke Zeros, those are probably all pulling from the exact same brand collection. You know, they probably all share the same shades of red, all the same shades of gray, so on and so forth. So if you're adding just a very similar brand, but just slightly different, almost like a theme, then you can do that at the alias level. Now, if you are adding a completely different brand itself, what you would have to do then, so say if you're Coke and you're adding Sprite, is you would actually have to create a new brand collection. So you could rename this to brand Coke, and then you would have to create a new collection that you might rename brand Sprite. You almost have to rebuild that entire collection, because again, the colors are going to be completely different. Your shades of red might be completely different. Your shades of green might be completely different. So it really depends on the type of different brand that you're trying to add. Again, if you're adding a similar brand, one that's still associated with the parent company, in the case of Diet Coke or Coke, you know, doing that at the alias level is just fine. But again, if you're adding an entirely new brand, it might make sense to add another brand collection. So let's go ahead and just delete this collection as well. And since we're on the topic of colors, and let's rename this to brand. And then since we're on the topic of colors, and again, when it comes to this multi-brand stuff, we do have some videos on that. So be sure to check out our variables and design system playlists. But when it comes to light and dark mode, since we are on the color, we can do that at the mapped level. So we'll go with our mapped, or not mapped, we'll go with our light mode, and then we'll also go with our dark mode as well. Now, we're not going to build out our dark mode. We'll probably do that a little bit later in the series. But again, if you are looking to streamline things, jump a little bit ahead, maybe you already have a design system and curious using this approach where you would add your dark theme, you would do that at the mapped level. And again, we'll likely cover that a little bit later in the series, more in depth.
Thanks for watching today's video, everyone. Just want to encourage everyone to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Your support will go a really long way. And feel free to take a look at all of our other awesome videos as well, covering various topics on design systems and more. If you are building out your design system for your company and do need some help, feel free to give us a shout. We put some links in the description as to where you can get in touch with us, and hope to see you online at UI Collective.